Hey guys, Henry here, and today we're going to be going through and explaining Season 1 of Netflix's new series, The Queen's Gambit. It's a new series streaming on Netflix starring Anya Taylor-Joy as Elizabeth Harmon, an orphan chess prodigy as she climbs through the ranks of the chess masters set in the period of the 1960s. And not only is she battling for chess supremacy, she's also facing demons of her own. And the first thing I did after finishing this series was to look up whether or not this show was based on a true story. Unfortunately, it's not, but that doesn't detract in any way from the story itself. I also was really curious as to whether the actors were moving the pieces in a memorized pattern, and it does turn out that the sequences were actually prepared by grandmasters and chess coaches, and then obviously executed by the actors. So apparently the show is actually quite faithful to the game of chess and the strategies implemented throughout, and although I might not have any real clue about any of these chess strategies, openings, defenses, endgames, I'm sure that chess experts watching this series would be able to appreciate it. Before we jump into this breakdown, don't forget to hit that like button and to hit subscribe to get more content from me. And as always, with these types of explainer videos, there will be spoilers ahead for The Queen's Gambit. Episode 1. Openings. So the first episode really breaks down Elizabeth's backstory. Her mother was killed in a car accident when she was around 9 years old, and she became orphaned and was taken away to an orphanage. During the series, we're actually given glimpses into her past and into her interactions with her biological mother through these little snippets at the beginning and throughout each episode. And rather than talking briefly about it in each episode as we break them down, I think it makes more sense just to spell it out all here at the beginning. Beth's mother previously worked at the University of Cornell, and she was actually a very smart lady and she had published books. However, she grew mentally unstable, and through this she pushed Beth's father away and kept Beth to herself. Beth's biological father initially wanted to get her help, but he gave up in the end and left the both of them. And throughout the series we see these little bits of advice that Beth's mother gives her, and she essentially tells her as a child that she won't be able to make any real relationships and that one day she'll be alone and she'll need to fend for herself. Pretty grim stuff to be telling such a young kid. One day, Beth's mother takes her to go and find her father, as she's no longer able to cope with raising Beth on her own. It's been 5 years since they last saw him, and he's started a completely new life, and he's got a new family and a new child, and he refuses to help, telling her to just take Beth and just leave. It's after this that Beth's mother decides to drive headfirst into oncoming traffic, intending to kill the both of them. And the crash results in her death, but Beth comes out unscathed and orphaned, and having to deal with this emotional baggage. Beth is then taken to an orphanage where the kids are given tranquilizer pills to make them compliant, and one day she gets sent to dust off erasers in the basement, and she finds the custodian, Mr. Shable, playing chess with himself down there, and she notices him and is intrigued by the game he's playing, mesmerized by the board. She begs him to teach her, and he is initially reluctant, but he eventually agrees, and she's a super quick learner, and he teaches her more than just the rules, but he also teaches her specific strategies and technical openings and defenses. You know, the typical stuff you learn in chess when you're 9 years old. Beth finds the tranquilizers allow her to focus and replay the chess games in her head, visually seeing the pieces moving on the ceiling. So she decides it's a great idea to just bank up all of these tranquilizer pills and hit him all in one big dose to make sure she gets real high and gets a real good look at those pieces on the ceiling. Mr. Shable keeps teaching her chess, and she quickly overcomes him in skill, now becoming obsessed with the game. So he introduces her to the local high school chess club teacher, who she plays and destroys, and the teacher, realizing she might actually be some sort of prodigy, he snaps a picture of Mr. Shable and Beth and invites her to come and play with some of the boys in the chess team. The orphanage stops providing the kids with tranquilizer pills after a state mandate that kids shouldn't really be given tranquilizers, and Beth begins to have withdrawal symptoms, feeling on edge, and unable to get that sweet feeling of cloudiness that allows her to see the board on the ceiling. Jolene, Beth's best friend at the orphanage, manages to get her 2 extra pills and gives them to her before she goes off to the high school to verse the boys in chess. At the high school, she absolutely schools 10 tough-looking dudes simultaneously, resulting in a very salty bunch of boys, and returns to Mr. Shable gloating about how rudimentary their play was and how good it felt to beat them. Beth goes back to Jolene for more tranks, but she doesn't have any, so Beth takes it upon herself to break into the medical office and literally stuffs her face full of the pills and tries to steal the whole jar. But before she can get out of the office, she's caught, and at that moment, the tranks she scoffed down start to kick in, and she collapses to the ground and drops the jar. Episode 2. Exchanges. As punishment, Beth is not allowed to play chess anymore, and she approaches Mr. Shable for help, but he ignores her. We then get a big time skip, and the first thing I thought was, where did that chess teach her go? Why didn't he realize that she was a prodigy and help her develop that skill? It just seemed like he found out about her, saw her do this amazing thing and beat 10 guys and just forgot. Anyway, we skip ahead in time and now Beth becomes Anya Taylor-Joy, a 15-year-old teenager now, and she's adopted by the Wheatleys, who seem nice enough, not rich, but it does look like they do well for themselves. Before she leaves, she says goodbye to Jolene and apologizes to her that she never got adopted. And as she's packing her things, she's unable to find the first chess book given to her by Mr. Shable, Modern Chess Openings. Now starting her new life, Beth goes to school where she's mocked for her drab outfits and her brains and quickly becomes the odd one out. She asks a girl, hopeful that there's a chess club and somewhere she can fit in, but unfortunately there just isn't one. She learns about this chess tournament with prize money of up to $100, but with a $5 entry fee, something that she can't afford and Mrs. Wheatley is unwilling to pay for. She wants to get a job, but apparently only colored girls her age get jobs, so she's left to send a letter to Mr. Shable asking for the $5 entry fee and offering to double it if she wins any prize at all. Mr. Shable sends Beth a reply letter containing the $5 she needed. Beth also helps Mrs. Wheatley get her prescription medicine, which turns out to be the same green tranquilizer pills Beth loves to take. So each time she goes to get Mrs. Wheatley's prescription, she keeps half for herself and goes back to playing against herself on the ceiling. Her first tournament. As you'd expect, Beth going into this tournament is a complete nobody. She hasn't played chess against anyone in forever. She's just been playing it against herself, really. And so it's sort of understandable that she's disrespected and completely underestimated. She doesn't have a ranking, and the organizers insist that she play in the beginner pool, but she insists that she play in the open pool, and she makes her way through the competition, winning every match easily. She develops a flirty relationship with a guy named Towns and has a little crush on him. He's encouraging and he sees her talent for chess, and as she progresses through the rounds, she actually ends up versing him and defeating him, and he acknowledges that she is a very special player. Right after this, Beth gets her first period, and a girl offers her a pad and Beth accepts it, but is too embarrassed to tell her she doesn't know how to use it. Later that afternoon, she goes home to find out that Mr. Wheatley has left Mrs. Wheatley, and Beth is concerned that now she'll be forced to go back to the orphanage. But Mrs. Wheatley tells her that they'll lie so that she can stay with her. Beth also tells her that she's just had her first period, and Mrs. Wheatley agrees to show her how to deal with it. Beth goes on to the final and versus Harry Beltic, the highest ranked chess player in the tournament. He arrives late to the match and is constantly yawning throughout. He clearly isn't too impressed by Beth's run to the final. He gets Beth in quite a tricky situation, and she feels very stressed out, and she runs to the bathroom to take some of the tranquilizer pills. After taking the pills, she's able to see the path to victory and defeats him. After winning the tournament and winning the $100, it legitimizes Beth's chess hobby in Mrs. Wheatley's eyes, and now Mrs. Wheatley is just super keen for her to keep playing chess tournaments and winning them money. Episode 3. Doubled Pawns. They go to the Cincinnati Open, but now Beth isn't some random nobody. She's well known throughout the chess community and people actually respect and fear her. She runs through this competition and beats a grandmaster. After the competition, Mrs. Wheatley asks if she can receive a 10% commission on the winnings, and Beth offers to give her 15%. The two of them continue going city to city playing tournaments, winning money, and calling in sick at school. And Beth and Mrs. Wheatley's relationship flourishes into a mother-daughter relationship. However, there definitely are some red flags when Mrs. Wheatley semi-encourages Beth to drink all the time, saying stuff like, "As long as you get me another drink too, it's all good." The two essentially just enabling each other. As Beth wins more and more, she becomes more famous, with reporters even coming to interview her in the house, prodding into her past and even suggesting that her ability to recognize patterns may be in some way related to psychosis. And this is actually a tie-in with her mother, because this is what happened to her mother. Her mother was very brilliant and dealt with patterns and mathematics, and it's clear that she definitely suffered from a mental illness that led to her killing herself. With this newfound popularity, she gets invited to an apple pie social gathering, basically invited to hang out with the popular girls from school, and this is her first social event. She's pretty excited, she picks out a dress and she goes on over, but when she gets there, they only seem interested in boys and dancing and singing to funky music videos. Definitely not Beth's scene. So she decides to sneak away and finds one of the girls' parents' alcohol stash, and she steals a bottle and makes off with it back home, pops a trank, and enjoys her hallucinations of the chessboard on the ceiling. At the US Open, Beth runs into Towns again, but this time he's not playing in the tournament, but rather he's writing articles on the event. And they end up in his hotel room taking fairly sensual photos for the magazine, and yeah, the sexual tension is thick. They end up getting very close and almost kiss, but some rando named Roger enters the room and interrupts them. And it seems like this bloke might actually be Towns' boyfriend, although it's never explicitly confirmed. Beth runs through the competition and faces off against Benny Watts in the final, the #1 ranked US player. He has a conversation with her beforehand, identifying a flaw in her game against Beltic and pointing out how Beltic could have beaten her. This rattles Beth, who is shocked that her game had a weakness and it was so easily identified by Watts, and she loses confidence. Beth goes into the final match unbeaten, and Benny having drawn twice. So to win, Beth only needs to draw. However, determined to prove herself, she plays aggressively to win. After a very tough game, Beth is forced to resign and Benny defeats her. The first loss she's experienced ever, really, if we don't count the games she played against Mr. Shable in the basement, and her and Benny end up co-champions of the US Open. Episode 4, Middle Game. Beth attends a Russian class at a community college and gets invited to a party after class, and loses her virginity to a stoner, who literally has penis candles lying around his house. Unfortunately, the sex wasn't good, because the guy was stoned. The next morning, no one is in the house, having all apparently gone to Cincinnati to see a movie, but they've kindly left Beth a joint to enjoy on her own. Beth hangs around and cleans up the house and smokes the joint and indulges herself and gets drunk all alone. They now go to their first international competition, and Beth and Mrs. Wheatley travel to Mexico City. And Mrs. Wheatley is extremely excited because she's got this long-time pen pal in Mexico by the name of Manuel. He picks them up from the airport, and Mrs. Wheatley is absolutely swept away by him, and she spends most of her time with him, now somewhat neglecting Beth. But it doesn't take long before he leaves Mrs. Wheatley, just as Mr. Wheatley did. As usual, Beth plows through the competition. However, there is a match of note versus a very young Russian boy by the name of Georgy Giv. Their match lasts for 5 hours before they adjourn on the first day, and the next day when they resume, Beth employs some interesting tactics by leaving the table and displaying signs of impatience to pressure and distract Georgie. It works and she eventually wins, but she does compliment him, saying that he's the best that she's ever played. There's also a bit of really interesting dialogue where she asks him what he'll do after he becomes the world champion at age 16, because that is his goal. He doesn't understand the question. But what Beth here is asking is, what happens once you reach the top? What happens once there's no one left to conquer? What meaning does the game have then? And it's something that she herself is afraid to confront. In an elevator, Beth overhears Borgov, the #1 player in the world, and 2 of his Russian associates discussing her play, and they completely underestimate her. But Borgov tells them that she's an orphan and plays chess to survive, much like they do. The next match she has is against Borgov, and he proves to be the best and defeats Beth handily. And during the match, Beth notices that Mrs. Wheatley isn't in attendance. When she goes back to the room, she begins talking about what happened in the match, but Mrs. Wheatley doesn't respond. Beth then finds her dead, eyes wide open, lying on the bed. The doctors take her body and they suspect she died of hepatitis, likely worsened by her excessive drinking. Beth asks the doctor for some tranquilizers, and he tells her that she doesn't actually need a prescription for them in Mexico City. So naturally, in her distressed state, she goes out and stocks up hard. She then calls Mr. Wheatley to tell him about the death of Mrs. Wheatley, but he really couldn't care less. He tells Beth, she can have the house, she can have everything, and he explains where she should bury the body and who to call at the bank to make the mortgage payment arrangements. And Beth makes her way back home with Mrs. Wheatley's body in tow, sipping on another drink. Episode 5, Fork. Beth arrives home to what is now her house, and it's empty and sad, with only the memories of her mother, Mrs. Wheatley, hanging around. Harry Beltic gives her a ring saying that he's going to be in town, and he gives her his condolences about losing to Borgov and asks if she would be willing to let him train her. It's funny that I don't think he really mentioned her mum dying. Instead, he mentioned losing to Borgov. I guess that's where their priorities lie. Beth, looking around at her lonely house, agrees and asks him to come over as soon as possible. They continue working together and analyzing chess games and theories, with Beltic suggesting that Beth use more memorized and set plays than just improvising when she feels like it. And the more Beltic is around, the closer they seem to get. Beltic tells Beth that he's moving into his apartment soon and will need to look for a part-time job while he takes classes. And Beth offers for him to stay with her in the house for free, and they bang. He also finds her tranquilizer pills. But as they keep playing chess, Beltic realizes that Beth is just on another planet to him, and that he has nothing left to teach her. He realizes that he no longer loves the game as he once did, and no longer is obsessed with it to the point that he needed to win it all, like Beth is. And Beltic comes to the realization that her obsession with the game would always have priority over any relationship they may have. So Beltic decides to leave, to go study to be an electrical engineer, and not to be some chess bum, in his own words. US Open 1967. Beth runs into Benny Watts again, and they both vow to beat each other in the final. They predictably run through their competition and reach the final against each other. 2 nights before their matchup, Benny pressures Beth into playing him in speed chess, betting $5 a game, and Benny absolutely fleeces her several times, embarrassing her in front of the crowd. Beth is distraught and goes back to her room, and she puts on her mum's old jacket and cries. But the next day, she's motivated to defeat Benny and studies really hard. Now at the final table, it comically jump cuts after the first move to the both of them at the bar, with Benny essentially congratulating Beth on her victory, and he offers to have Beth come to New York to stay with him to train in preparation for the next international competition in Paris, where she will face Borgov once again. And interestingly, Benny is quick to notice that Beth seems to be a very heavy drinker, and he warns her that the drinking might actually ruin her. Episode 6, Adjournment. Beth and Benny make their way to New York City, and they sing songs and play verbal games of chess. I have no idea how you do this. How can you know where all the pieces are by just saying a move after another? It just makes no sense to me. But they can do it, which is just mind-blowing. And anyway, Beth sees the city from afar and she admires its beauty. But when they arrive at Benny's apartment, it's underground, it's pretty dank, the shower's exposed, the couch does not look comfortable, and she has to pump up an inflatable mattress each night. It's not exactly the glamorous New York City that Beth was imagining. But then they practice, and Beth learns more, and it is really clear that Benny has a lot to offer and a lot to teach her. One night, Benny invites a bunch of his friends over, and Cleo, a French girl, offers Beth a drink, but she declines, opting to stay sober. And they then play a simultaneous with her for $10 a match, and she completely runs them over. She plays again and again, fleecing Benny for the cash and getting that sweet revenge. After everyone leaves, Beth and Benny share a moment, and they bang. The night before Beth's rematch with Borgov in Paris, Cleo calls Beth and invites her for a drink. She's initially hesitant, but she ends up going downstairs and they both pound some drinks. Come on, Beth. I mean, you've got the final tomorrow. You are doing so well. Why are you just self-destructing right now? And Beth reveals to Cleo that she's still in love with Towns. And to get their minds off it, Cleo gets them to go and chat up some nice Parisian boys. The next morning, Beth wakes up late for a match with Borgov. She quickly pops 2 tranquilizer pills and sculls a mini bottle of vodka, I think, and she leaves Cleo sleeping in the room. It's unclear whether or not Beth and Cleo slept together, but I'm just gonna say, yeah, they banged. During the match with Borgov, she makes her move with a lot of uncertainty and is clearly hungover as she sculls water throughout the match. And at the end of the day, she's completely outplayed by Borgov, and she sheds a tear as she resigns. Benny asks her to come back to New York so they can just talk it out, and he's worried that she'll just get drunk or high all alone. But Beth opts to go home to Lexington, planning to do just that. When she gets home, she gets a call from a lawyer informing her that Mr. Wheatley has changed his mind about giving her title to the house. So she meets with Mr. Wheatley to discuss what was promised, him insisting that he never promised her anything and that he isn't going to let her just take what is his, and that she is not his daughter. And he says that it was all Mrs. Wheatley's idea, she was the one who wanted a child and he only agreed to it just to get her to shut up. Beth, absolutely frustrated and just wanting Mr. Wheatley to just get out of her life, agrees to buy out his equity in the property for $7,000 minus the cost for her mother's funeral. With the house now hers, she throws herself into redecorating and making the place her own. She seems to find some therapy in this. It's good because she doesn't just go off the rails. But there's one night where Beth goes to dinner on her own and she has a Gibson in honor of her dead mother, and the next thing you know, she's off the wagon and getting hammered on her own, spiraling, and she ends up hitting her head really hard on the corner of a table. I was genuinely worried she was going to suffer some sort of brain damage or even worse, actually be dead, but I really feel like they brushed off this brain injury. I thought, maybe the next time she plays chess she'll forget how to move the pieces or something, but yeah, it was nothing that dramatic. Harry Beltic tries to reach out to Beth by phone, but she never picks up, and he even visits her house, but she's unconscious because of the head injury. He finally catches her when she returns to a local tournament, and he tells her that he works at the supermarket and has seen her there, smelling of booze and looking pretty bad. He tells her that his father was the same, and it wasn't like he was an abusive drunk or anything, but he was just slowly drinking himself to death. Beth, completely in denial and not willing to take up Harry's advice, ignores him and continues on with her life. And at the end of the episode, Jolene, Beth's best friend at the orphanage, shows up on her doorstep. Episode 7, endgame. Jolene tells Beth that she's come to find her because Mr. Shable has passed away, and the funeral is in a couple of days. Jolene finds the trank pills and sees the alcohol, and Beth tells her that if Jolene wasn't there, she'd probably be drinking, and that if there is no chess, then she might as well just be drunk. Unable to really find any true meaning in life without chess. Jolene also reveals to Beth that she actually kept the book Modern Chess Openings from her because she was pissed that she got adopted, and she returns it to her and the two share a special moment. They go back to the orphanage and Beth revisits her previous home and explores the basement where she learnt to play chess, finding that Mr. Shable had been following her journey the entire time and that he was her biggest fan. Beth breaks down in the car as she never gave Mr. Shable the $10 that she owed him, and she could now never tell him how much she appreciated all of his help and support. Beth is now preparing for her trip to Russia for the Moscow Invitational, and she rejects funding from a Christian organization after they request a public statement from her, which she's unwilling to give. She asks Benny to help her out and go with her, but Benny refuses because of the way Beth had treated him. Jolene steps in and offers to help pay for her trip, and the State Department also agreed to assist Beth and provide some security. While on their way to Moscow, Beth's told that she's not allowed to drink, and she's not allowed to go anywhere without her bodyguard, and she's not allowed to pick up any phone calls unless it's from her bodyguard. She runs through most of the competition, and she faces up against a previous world champion in Luchenko, who now is a much older gentleman and doesn't hold that mantle anymore. They play a long match and they have to adjourn to the next day. And back at the hotel, Beth sees Borgov helping Luchenko, strategizing for the next day. This motivates Beth to go back to her room and study even harder, and the next day she defeats him, and he gives her great respect, saying that she was the best player that he's ever faced. She plays one more match that lasts over 4 hours and makes it to the final against Borgov again. Before this match, she flushes away her pills, determined not to return to a previous vice. In the rematch, Beth surprises Borgov by playing the Queen's Gambit, and the game adjourns after 40 moves. When Beth goes to exit, she walks in front of the press and she tells them that she learnt chess from Mr. Shable in the basement of her orphanage when she was just 9 years old, intending to give her old teacher the credit he truly deserved. And then as a surprise, Towns is there, taking photos and writing articles for a Kentucky paper. They hug and they return to Beth's hotel room and talk about what happened between them previously, and they agree to just be friends. The next morning, Beth gets a call from Benny, Harry, and some other American chess players, and they tell her they've been working together all night to analyze Borgov's potential next moves and talk her through how to best retaliate. Although this sentiment is very, very nice, realistically, only Benny was really helping her at this stage, I think. I definitely don't think the twins from her first tournament were really providing that much value to her at this level. Beth studies all the variations intensely, and the next day she comes out strong, but Borgov deviates from how they expected him to play. Towns panics in the crowd, but Beth takes a deep breath and is able to see the board on the roof without having to abuse some sort of substance, providing her with the ability to see the multiple paths that the match could go, and Beth confidently continues to play. Borgov then offers Beth a draw, something he never does, and Beth rejects it and they continue on, and Beth eventually wins, becoming the world champion. On the way to the airport, she asks to get out of the taxi and walks through a park in Moscow where a whole bunch of people are playing chess. They recognize her and warmly embrace her. In complete opposition to what the Americans feel, the Russians aren't acting as if the enemy has beaten them in their own game. They completely respect Beth Harmon, and she sits down and starts a game of chess with one of the players. They legitimately made playing chess so intense and so captivating. The looks in between the plays, in between the moves, the shuffling of the pieces, the clicking of the clock, all along with this swelling music, it just completely built up that intensity throughout the matches. And yeah, I didn't even know what was going on. They were moving pieces so quickly, I didn't know what was going on, who was ahead, who was behind. But the context around it, the people watching on the side engaged, the intensity in which the actors were looking at the pieces and deliberately making those moves, it all added to this really sports-like atmosphere. And it has to be mentioned, the set designs, the hair and costume, the makeup, it all really brought you back to that era in the 50s and 60s. You could tell that they didn't really travel too much for this. A lot of things were indoor or had a bit of a green screen or blue screen type of thing, but I think they did really well with what they had. And Anya Taylor-Joy, an absolutely brilliant performance. She's definitely been an actress that's turned in a lot of quality performances, and it's about time that, she gets that A-list recognition. She plays this character so well. It's a character that's so confident in her ability to play chess and so unafraid at times, but yet also so vulnerable and alone in this world that women haven't really had a chance to explore. The one actor I found out of place was the character of Benny Watts, played by Thomas Brodie-Sangster. best known for his role in the Maze Runner series. His character seemed like a very eccentric and cool guy, and unfortunately the vibe he gave me was like a little kid pretending to be a cool adult, and that just didn't really work for me. And it just took me out of it every time I saw him with his cowboy hat and leather jacket and his knife in the side pocket. It just seems so silly. Overall, I think what this series does really well is amalgamate all these different genre types. It's a coming of age story with this girl going through these extreme circumstances, but is going through all these changes with her body and her emotions and her feelings, and doesn't really have anyone there to support her. It's also a sports film about overcoming the odds and playing with the hand you're dealt, and it's also a series about finding family in the people around you, and it's also a series about self-belief and overcoming addiction. It's got all these different elements, and I think it balanced it really well to push this really compelling and thrilling story. Thank you guys for watching this video. Please be sure to hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe to Cloudy TV for more content from me. What did you guys think of The Queen's Gambit? Did you enjoy the series? Did you learn a bit about chess? If you know a bit about chess, was it actually an accurate depiction of chess tournaments and the sort of strategies they would implement at a high level? I'd love to know, so just comment in the comment section down below. Be sure to check out some of my other videos down below. As always, thank you guys again, and I'll catch you all next time.